Hello, everyone. On today's episode of Coffee with Convery, I have the pleasure of hosting a dynamic individual whose strategic mindset, creative prowess, and passion for connecting people have reshaped the landscape of student and employer engagement. Allow me to introduce Jonah Ferguson, the coordinator of employer and student engagement at Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo, British Columbia, Canada. Jonah brings a unique blend of skills and experience to the table. Armed with a Bachelor of Business Administration and Marketing, Jonah's journey from a marketing student to a seasoned professional has been nothing short of inspiring. Jonah's impact extends well beyond the campus, as demonstrated by his successful organization of large-scale in-person career fairs, showcasing over 60 employees and attended by over 650 students and alumni. Under his coordination, the Career Studio has become a hub for career exploration and professional growth, equipping students and alumni with the tools and opportunities needed to navigate that competitive job market successfully. In addition to his professional achievements, Jonah's multifaceted background includes studying political science and maintaining a deep interest in current affairs, technology, business, socioeconomic issues, and human motivation and psychology. He is always ready to engage in conversations on any topic, showcasing his well-rounded and curious nature. We're in for a treat as we uncover the story behind Jonah Ferguson's career and his dedication to empowering the next generation of professionals. Jonah, welcome to Coffee with Convery.
Thanks, Brian.
Super excited to have you here today, and maybe we'll start out with a few rapid-fire questions if that's okay for you.
Perfect.
All right, so what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are he, him.
Awesome. And what's your superpower?
I was originally going to say imagination and positivity, but then I asked my wife, and her answer was actually thinking outside the box and remembering everybody that I've ever met and most of the interactions I've had with them.
That's a skill.
Yep.
And a power.
Yep.
Awesome, awesome. Next question is favorite smell. Do you have a favorite smell?
Yeah, and this is going to be a very West Coast answer, would be either cedar wood or the rainforest after it rains.
Love it. I love it. I was wondering if you were going to go there because I thought about where you are, and
Yep.
it has a unique smell, right?
hmm
Interesting.
I love the rainy weather we get out here. It's definitely one of my highlights.
Awesome. So thinking about, you obviously meet different people and you've, done a lot with young students and helping them navigate. What is the best compliment you've ever received?
Um, I might actually have two answers. One would be I remember an elementary school teacher telling me that due to my imagination, I should be an author. Um, and then another one actually just last week. I have a background in social media management, and someone on Instagram said that I had influenced them to go check out a new restaurant and coffee shop due to the photos I'd been posting on my story. And I took that as a pretty great compliment because I'm always trying to encourage people to get out, try new places, and hearing that there was a positive result made me feel really good.
Okay, so now we need to add influencer to your title.
Yes, hopefully.
I love it. I love it. Good for you. Yeah, we need to get out more. We also have like our go-to snack. What is your go-to snack?
Uh, Chips, potato chips, primarily sun chips, because I tell
Okay,
myself that those are the healthiest.
those are. Yes, I
Like,
believe. I believe so too.
yeah,
But potato chips as well. Okay.
yeah.
Um, Favorite subject in school?
High school would have been social studies.
Okay.
In university, it would have actually been either introductory zoology or human resource management, focusing on organizational culture.
Zoology, really?
Yeah, it was learning about the whole phylum, all of the animal kingdoms, and the everything from sponges up to chordata. Um, yeah, I have quite a range of interests. So,
I love that. I
yeah,
love that. We'll get more into that for sure. I
yeah.
love that. Um, we all start somewhere, first jobs. Thinking back, what was your very first job?
Technically would have been a paper route, but my first professional job would have been bussing tables at a retirement home.
Okay. All right. Okay. Last one, and then we'll jump into your background here. So, thinking if you could pick just one word to describe you yourself, what would you pick?
I'd say outgoing would be my
Okay.
word.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely. All right. So take us back to where it all began for you. Where did you grow up? Tell us a bit about yourself, your values, your passions, your interests. Why don't we start there?
Yeah, sounds great. So I actually grew up here in Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, where I currently live. I come from a large family where I have seven siblings. And I would say, yeah, so seven siblings,
Wow.
six boys and two girls. All the boys start with J. Um, and then I would say that I grew up in a relatively normal kind of middle class Christian household. Um, Amongst my siblings, I think that I was by far the most outgoing and probably caused my parents the most gray hairs. Um, as I always enjoyed entertaining people, making people laugh, and that often enjoyed doing stupid stunts and pranks sometimes. Um, yeah, and one thing that I also remember when I was young, that I was able to take in multiple forms of stimulus at once. And I actually have a very vivid memory of my mom asking me how I could listen to an audio cassette, if you remember those,
Yeah.
while I was playing a Pokemon game on my Game Boy Color, and whether I was actually able to focus on doing both things at the same time, which I was. So I think back to this a lot because I wonder whether it was a sign of the things to come and our current generation, which is such short attention spans and so hyper fixated on multiple things at once. Yeah, so that was a little bit about me when I was younger, but yeah, as I got older, throughout elementary school and high school, I was always a decent student, and there weren't many subjects that I struggled with or things that I didn't enjoy learning about, um, except for chemistry. That was my one weakness. I still don't know the difference in structures between saturated and unsaturated fats. Um, but when I got to university in 2014, this wide range of interests actually made it really difficult for me to isolate my educational and career path. And I took general studies in my first year, taking everything from physics and zoology to history, psychology, and religious studies. Um, just because I felt like I was really a jack of all trades and I would prefer to have a wide range of knowledge and skills rather than feeling like I was limiting myself by focusing on only one area of knowledge or one skill set. Um, and at that time, I almost wish that I had been limited by just a few choices, by being able to say, I'm not good at math, I'm not going to do finance. Um, because at the time, I felt really paralyzed by the amount of possibilities and directions that I could go just because I felt like I could do anything. So I didn't know what to do.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. As I eventually came to the end of my first year at university and I realized that I needed to look at declaring a major, that's where I settled on political studies due to this interest in social studies back in high school and my belief that this was still an area of study where that would allow me to continue to be a jack of all trades and would also yield a wide range of career opportunities. And although I really enjoyed learning about political studies, history, and all of the other things that are driving the current political issues and events that we're seeing in our world, 2 years later, after starting that program, I was just sitting in a class on Greek political theorem one day, and I made the decision that this just wasn't the right fit for me at the time. And so I dropped out, took a few months off just to work and figure out what I really wanted to do. Um, and during that time, I took up photography as a hobby because that was something that I saw that I could integrate with other things I was doing as I was already going out and hiking and exploring beautiful Vancouver Island where I'm located. And then eventually just through photography, I got involved in Instagram and I eventually started connecting with other creators and using that social media platform to expand my network and audience, while using photography to show off the beauty of Vancouver Island and hopefully influence people to get out and explore. Um, and that was just like a really interesting time in my life because I was in that limbo period where
Right.
um, I was just kind of feeling really listless, and I was disappointed that I hadn't been able to uh, settle upon a career path like so many of my classmates had been able to, going on to university, doing the 4 year degree, while I was still kind of trying to figure it out. Um, and yeah, just during that time, I started listening to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks. Um, and I actually found myself picking up a book that I'd read back in high school, which is my favorite book still to this day, and that is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and
Yeah.
Influence People. Quite a keystone one there, but Um, yeah, there was a bunch of things around human motivation that jumped out to me. But even in my current role, I even remember that there was a story in that book that jumped out at me at the time, about a woman who tailored her resume, her application back in the 1900s to a position, and just doing that, she'd received 12 different job offers. Um, and I remember thinking about these concepts of, okay, you need to make yourself unique, you need to
Hmm.
stand out, and those kind of things will help get you where you want it to go. Um, and also around that time, I had read a book by C.S. Lewis that touched on topics of ego and pride. And I also found myself really becoming interested in human interactions and how many of the things we see are driven by ego and personal ambition, whether
Hmm.
the individuals realize it or not. And so, as I was listening to all these audiobooks, podcasts, and other forms of media, I found that I was often gravitating towards content related to human motivation, psychology, business, and taking that into consideration with my Instagram and social media background. That was when I decided to return to VIU that fall, to pursue a degree in marketing.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
What a what an interesting background and concepts of how your mind was navigating all those things. And I also like the fact that you share too, like you, and we hear this now and you see it too, the students that you help is sometimes we
Mhm.
compare ourselves to others in those moments of like, oh, well, they've had a 4-year degree and I haven't. What's wrong with this situation? Am I not doing the right thing? But I think what's really clear about your journey so far and what you've been doing too is like you've created your own success in what you're
Mhm.
doing. And that's really important. If we think about that whole journey from marketing student to the coordinator of employer and student engagement, and thinking about even your educational components from Vancouver Island University, how has
Mhm.
that helped you to approach your own professional development and career success, really?
Yeah, so even as a student, I was always hyper focused on networking outside of the classroom, as it was a goal of mine to stay in Nanaimo close to family. Um, Nanaimo has about 100,000 people living here,
Okay.
about a medium-sized town, but I realized that if I wanted to stay here and make a sustainable living, I would want to go out and network with many of those local business owners so that I could. I realized I would be competing with other classmates, other people in the area. So I wanted to have an edge where I could get those roles that would allow me to stay here and make a living. So even as I was studying and taking in all of this classroom knowledge, I was always looking for opportunities where I could put this knowledge to use in real world contexts, where I could also develop my network. Um, and honestly, one of the things I'm most thankful for is doing photography as a hobby and social media. That as my skills were growing in that way, it allowed me to engage more and more with local companies as I was contracted for photographing events, product shots, or doing social media consultations. So I came in right at a good time around where Instagram was taking off, and a lot of these smaller mom and pop shops were realizing you need to get online to be competitive. So that was a very fortunate road for me. But even during this time as a student, I was still very proactive in my own outside learning, where I was still taking in those podcasts and audiobooks, because I wanted to make sure that my skills and knowledge were as relevant as possible. One of the books I read was Ask Gary Vee by Gary Vaynerchuk on social media and marketing. Um, and in it, I remember that he mentioned it can be often difficult for curriculum to keep pace with the rate of innovation, especially in sectors like marketing and digital, where things can change every 6 months. Um, and so I remember, even as a student, that only pushed me to spend more time networking outside of the classroom, um, and to continue to grow my own learning. And yeah, so I had the potential to be a really good student, but I was always looking outside of the classroom, and trying to look how I could optimize that time. Um, and I think just as a result of also my personality and growing up the way I did when I was younger, I realized that it was my desire where I wanted to obtain a job in the industry before I had even graduated, um, and prove to myself and others in a way that I could attain the kind of job that I wanted, through personality and personal aptitude alone, um, rather than necessarily having to rely on a credential. Like I remember always thinking,
Good for
okay, if I
you.
could meet a CEO and just have him like me from a conversation, offer me a job, that's what I want. And yeah, that goes back to that outgoing personality. Um, but also, I was chatting with somebody and they were mentioning how Toronto is about 10 years ahead of Vancouver, which is about 2 years ahead of Vancouver Island. Um, and as I was kind of growing my skill set, I didn't want to be perceived as kind of a backwoods, not professional in the level, able to compete with people from New York, anywhere else in the world. Um, and so I found that I was constantly listening to news podcasts and audiobooks on world issues, technology, business, finance, and any other topics, just because I wanted personally that anytime I met somebody, such as a CEO professional from anywhere, such as Toronto, New York, or elsewhere, I wanted to be able to have informed and engaging conversations on any topic that might arise. Um,
Makes
yeah, so,
sense. Yeah, no, it makes sense. Absolutely.
yeah.
What's interesting too, if and sorry, did I cut you off? I'm sorry if you were going to say something else. I was going to ask you a
Oh
question.
no, go
No.
ahead.
Okay, okay. What's really interesting about seizing the moment, especially when you talked about the photography and the Instagram and going out and actually then helping to photo shoot events and other things like, what a great way to network and meet people too, right? I think
Yeah.
sometimes we don't think about, sometimes think about networking in a way that
Mhm.
it's an inanimate object where it's like, okay, you got to go network. Well, you're doing it and you may not even realize you're doing it, especially for our listeners who might be listening now and thinking about moments that they've had either with a camera or whatever and places they are. These are places that you're going to meet people that are going to make connections for you, right? So I think
Mhm.
that's really cool and really interesting. So your role, you oversee career service initiatives and major events.
Mhm.
Can you share maybe a standout achievement or initiative that you believe has had a lasting impact on some of the growth of the students at Vancouver Island University that you've helped out with?
Yeah, so having been a VIU student previously, I'm able to kind of look at what I wish had been around, and then I'm located in a great team where my manager is amazing, gives me a lot of the flexibility to create these initiatives. And one of those things was, as you mentioned previously, that a career fair we did in September. When I was a student, we didn't have many large scale in-person career fairs, and so that was something that I wanted to bring about so that students could come see the entire range of um, opportunities available to them. So, and we are also, our department, we service all faculties. So VIU has over 150 different programs.
Wow.
Um, at most institutions, there would be somebody in my role doing what I do for each faculty. Um, Part of our value, I think, is although it means I feel the responsibility where I'm trying to represent as much of the institution as I can, being able to do these events where we're able to act as a hub and bring together everything from Island Health, which is our local healthcare hospital service, school districts, businesses. We're able to bring students together and show them you can do business at any of these institutions. There's HR, there's all of these roles available to you. Um, and yeah, so that was one event that I was very excited about. Got a lot of great feedback from students and employers. Even I was chatting with an MBA student who he'd moved from working at Walmart part-time to he got a job at Costco as a result of that event, which is a pays more, has a little, so that was something I saw as a personal win because I'm always trying to help students find those better opportunities. Yeah, but a few other course things we've done. I recently launched an employer directory where we have a online web page is based on the national occupation classifications, and I'm constantly updating it with the best employers in Canada on the islands, so that students can go. They can look up the industry for business and finance, and they'll immediately get a list of subcategories and a list of the top employers. So they'll be able to click on RBC, they get a description of the company and then a link to the company's
Awesome.
hiring page.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, and that kind of came about as just realizing for me as a student, I was doing this local networking and I knew a lot of the local players and industries, but we have a lot of international students, a lot of students who might not realize if you go to one of these companies, there's opportunities in graphic design, HR, and financial analysts, all these kind of thing. So that was one that we recently launched to help students with their career exploration that we've been getting a lot of good feedback on. Um, and then on the flip side of that, because I'm situated between the employers and the students, we also I put together an online module on professional business etiquette. Um, to help prepare our students and make sure that they understand if they're going out into these environments that they are equipped to compete, that they're presenting themselves and the institution well, that the employers are happy, and that students are understanding what employers are looking for, and communicating their value.
That's so important. Good for you. Like that is thinking like wider and more from a enterprise, experience and a working world experience.
Mhm.
We talked about networking obviously a little bit before we jumped over here to about your experience and the congratulations on all the great work you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, so what is your like, and I know you do this all the time, but recommending for students to build those meaningful connections. What is your thoughts to some of the students and people that might be listening today to think about, how do I go about this thing called networking and what should I be thinking? And I'm curious from your side of what advice you think you would give.
Yeah, so for networking, I would definitely say to get involved and get out there. For me, I was working as barista and social media manager, and those kind of things gave me the opportunity to network with a lot of, as well as photography, gave me a lot of opportunities to network. But I would really say to also be very collaborative when you're networking. That's always an approach that I've taken where I really prefer to provide value, facilitate connections between others, just so people will see that kind of value. And then also I take the mentality that I want to grow the pie rather than getting into competition where everybody's trying to take the current slice of the pie rather than contribute to growing the local economy, growing the industry. Um, and actually, I try to be very practical and very logical, but going back to the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, I always tell students to think of this in terms of networking. But one of my favorite quotes from Dale Carnegie was, um, when you're dealing with people, remember that you aren't dealing with creatures of logic, but creatures of emotion, bristling with prejudice and motivated by pride and vanity. So whenever I'm telling students to get, if they're going out to networking events, my main advice is realize the people you're connecting with, they are people too. They have their own motivations, they have their own concerns, problems. They have the thing, they're worried about their budget, their mortgage. Um, so if you come at them telling them all what you want, if you send them a sales email saying, "Hey, this is me, I need a job from you," that's not gonna build a positive relationship as if you connect with them and you are communicating with them um, of how you can solve their problems, how you can make their lives easier. Um,
So
and
true.
then, yeah, so I always tell students, show interest in others, practice active listening, and try to speak about less about yourself as opposed to asking questions. Um, but then also just to be interesting and solve problems. Um, and make yourself memorable because realizing when you are at things like conferences, networking events, like when I was at previous conferences, I would always look to ask interesting or thought-provoking questions to the keynote speakers or professionals that would make them take notice of me or remember me.
Hmm.
Um, well showing that you also had an understanding of the topic or the content that they were discussing. And also realizing when a keynote speaker is getting down from an event, they're going to be flocked by hundreds of people. How are you doing the thing to make yourself unique and interesting and showcasing that value in those contexts?
Some great, super great insights, of course. Nothing I would expect less from you, but also really insightful and like really interesting. And I love the memorable part as well as the mutual beneficial part too, because
Mhm.
often young people will say, well, I don't know if I have anything to offer or say. And I'm like, you absolutely do. And I think making it be a mutual beneficial conversation is more interesting than a one-way conversation. So I do appreciate your insights and thoughts on that. When most people move from networking, they move to maybe finding that mentor,
Mhm.
which is a little bit more maybe a little bit more direct, right, with one person or a couple of people. I've had multiple mentors in my life.
Mhm.
Have you had mentors who've played significant roles in your own professional development? And how do you view the importance of mentorship as well for students entering the workforce?
Yeah, so I definitely place a very high value in mentorship, and I have had a few great mentors, but I'm always looking. That was something I really wanted as a student was to kind of find some more of those traditional mentorships, the people who would take you under their wing.
Yeah,
Um, but at the same, so I think it is very important for students to find mentorship. But I also urge students to be cautious if they're seeking mentorship on their own as I was, because I was doing a lot of that networking and that career development outside of the institution personally. And just realizing that there might be those out there who are looking to sell them something or take advantage of cheap labor. So
that's right.
when I was a student, I connected with a local professional here in town and we went out for coffee for several times. Um, and then they eventually started referring to Napoleon Hill's The Secret. And I learned that they were actually just trying to sell me on a $12,000 life coaching course. So that's where I kind of bring in the side of, yeah, there is a lot of value for mentorship. Make sure you're getting connected with coaches,
Yeah,
professors, but then also just being
cautious.
cognizant.
Yeah,
Yes. So
absolutely. Wow. Yeah, you're right. No, sorry. Yeah, you're totally right. The other thing I think I want to chat with you about mentorship here too, and maybe take a little bit of a diversion here too, is the
yeah.
idea of, I know big part of what you do is reducing barriers for students, right? Like it's a
Mhm.
huge barrier that needs to be lifted and be challenged by someone like yourself who helps that. Um, I'm thinking about some of the individuals that are facing barriers or coming across different things that are difficult to navigate. I know you've implemented different strategies to help. What do you think about that as far as how others can help maybe implement strategies that you've done or things that you've helped? And then maybe a second part would be if you are a student who's running into these barriers, how can they kind of think about reaching out for help or maybe thinking about a different way to do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. For myself, working as a staff of the institution, one thing I'm always thinking about my messaging when I'm reaching out to students around initiatives, around resourcing, um, because coming from a marketing background, I'm always trying to make sure that I'm very consistent and that all students are represented and contacted, and that no one is left out. Our career studio, we're located in student affairs, where I work closely with many different teams, such as accessibility services. So I will constantly be reaching out to staff and other teams to let them know of things that are going on. And then VIU, we're located on a hill. We have tons of stairs, but I'll usually try to get out on campus just so I can have those face-to-face connections where I can let other faculty or staff know these are things going on. Is there any things you're seeing from students that we can do to improve these processes? So I usually try to take a very consistent messaging and two-way communication um, approach on helping connect with students. And yeah, like I said, we're acting like a hub. So I'm trying to get as many people coming into the institution, and then we'll send them to our Indigenous groups, student groups, relevant faculties, just to make sure there's that communication going out. And then
Perfect.
on our career studio side, I oversee a team of student employees where we provide those career services, and we're constantly looking for feedback from students, but implementing new resources, whether it's online tools like those resources I made on websites, or even bringing in software like we brought in a resume AI optimizer that students can use asynchronously. So if there are barriers to booking an appointment, we are providing multiple forms of value. Um, and then through events, I'm always trying to I'm always thinking through a lens of, I'm a very extroverted individual, but how do am I thinking in terms am I
Sure.
putting aside my own bias? and realizing if an introverted person comes to this event, we want to have a more low-key, quiet networking space available, just so we're providing as much resources to as many student groups as possible.
It's very thoughtful and very inclusive to think that way. And others that are listening to this podcast too, maybe can take a page out of your book to think about doing that and creating that space as well for people, because it is tough. And as we talk about this evolving, fast-going job market, um, I'm sure you get this question all the time, but thinking about our listeners too is like, how do I stand out to employers, right? That a lot of people will ask that question of me. I'm sure they ask it of
Mhm.
you. What's your advice to someone listening to this podcast and thinking about how they can, you said earlier about being unique, but also like other things that they might be able to think about?
Yeah, so I'm a huge proponent of LinkedIn. And so one of my main pieces of advice, use LinkedIn not just when you're looking for a job, but as an active tool.
Yes.
Do posting content, being a thought leader. Um, when I began my current role, it was actually just covering the end of a 6-month contract. And knowing that there was the possibility of me not being the successful applicant to reapply for this role, I still saw the benefit of being in this role, being in this space, and developing my own network of contacts within the talent acquisition and recruitment industry, so that I would have a higher likelihood of being poached later on, or having greater visibility when it came time to look on to other roles. So LinkedIn definitely, but then also taking that advice around networking and building positive relationships with professors, career coaches, recruiters, and other industry professionals, because there is such a thing as the hidden job market.
Mhm.
Not every employer is might be the best at marketing their opportunities and getting 100% visibility for all the relevant candidates. So if you have um, relationships with professionals who will be thinking of you and send you great resources when they come available. I specifically remember when I was looking for a job several years ago, I put out a call on Facebook and LinkedIn. Um, and Sandy Pell, she was a keynote speaker at a conference I had connected with a few years before. She actually responded to that, and she put me in contact with a few of her own contacts in Vancouver in the business industry. And that was just something she didn't need to do, but I really appreciated it at the time. Her taking that time to say, "This is somebody in need. Here you go," and providing that value. And that's something that I really want to reflect, and that's why I want to connect students and employers and provide that same level of generosity and kindness.
That makes a lot of sense. And I love two things too. The hidden job market, it is true. Sometimes
Mhm.
things go and they move 100 miles an hour and they haven't even posted the job. And I also think what you shared too about, you got to put yourself out there. I think
Mhm.
too often students and job seekers think, well, I applied to the job, I didn't hear anything. But using LinkedIn the way you described is something that I think you're really good at it, by the way. I mean, I follow
Thank
you
you.
often, and I think that the thing
Likewise.
about LinkedIn is obviously it's an informative medium to like find out, read up, do research, find out what's going on. Not
Mhm.
just when you're looking for a job. If you don't log on again because you found a job, you're missing out because there's so much
Mhm.
information that's shared now on LinkedIn. It's way bigger, as you know, but I want students and
Yeah.
listeners to think about it too, because I'm on it every day,
Mhm.
posting, commenting, thinking, sometimes just reading, right? So
Yes.
such a great thought for sharing, and thank you for sharing that, because I don't think everyone always thinks of LinkedIn as, okay, well, I don't need a job
Mhm.
right now, but that's not all that it's for, right?
No. Well, and I think there, like you said, there's so much great information on there. I'm always on there connecting with people, but reading the articles, um, because even just getting an environmental scan, keeping your finger on the pulse of Canada, the various industries, and
Absolutely.
seeing not knowledge is power. And if you're not in the job search, if you're aware of what are other similar roles being posted at, what kind of qualifications are needed, and that's a good way to keep yourself up to date on industry trends. And if you ever do have complications in your current role, then you're aware of, okay, what kind of jobs are out there, where,
Yep.
because Although it's sad to say, we see so many of the memes, so many of the posts of you've got to move laterally to get a higher paying job um, because that's become a trend where people will get locked in at a certain wage, so they usually feel like they have to go elsewhere. So
Yep.
just being cognizant of all those things.
Yeah, it's a great way to pull it all together. And thinking about social media, which you're big on, and I want you to also plug your Instagram if you want with your photography. I've seen your photography. It's really good. Um,
Oh, thank you.
um, what advice do you have for like students and emerging talent to how they can leverage social media as well to build their own brand and for job searching?
Yeah, so it's funny because my background in marketing, I always described myself as a marketer rather than a salesperson. So when I was doing social media, I always kind of I really used it for education and community building, and I often tried to take the approach tell, don't sell, essentially. So
Ah,
thinking in that way of when what is the value you're providing to others before you ask for anything in return. Because, like we said, everybody has their own biases. So when you go into these contexts, you focus on other people before yourself, essentially. Um, and I remember that Gary Vee, he had a concept where it was called jab, jab, left hook, essentially in sales.
mhm.
And that was if you're gonna go for a sales ask, make sure you've provided at least two pieces of value or content um, prior. So I would tell students, yeah, like don't go on there just asking or begging for jobs. Just post thought leadership articles,
Yeah,
show what you're doing, um, show your value and the project you're working on, whether it's a classroom project, an internship, highlighting a mentor or supervisor who's meant a lot to you, sharing some of the learning you've maybe received from a um, conference or a speaker, and post photos of yourself at the events, just so people can see you engaging, because then you'll eventually start to build up a space in the mind of potential recruiters. So when they think of, hey, I have this job, oh, I know this person is very well entrenched in that industry because I already have seen that student has obtained a lot of visibility in that space.
that is such a great piece of advice. Like, I don't think I know for a fact that like students don't do enough of what you just said. Like they go to these massive, like they do great work in the class
Mhm.
project or on a competition or whatever. And I don't think enough post about here's the three takeaways I learned or whatever. And that will pop up in
Mhm.
someone's feed, right? So when you're
Yes.
searching, it's not just the resumes and the thousands of applicants, but it's how are you engaging and sharing your lessons learned with others. I love that. I think that's such a great
Yes.
takeaway for some of these people that are listening. Like, don't be afraid. I think one of the big things I hear is people are like, well, I'm not sure I have anything to say or no one's going to read it. There's also people that read stuff that don't comment and they actually have
Mhm.
read it and thought about it. So you never know who you're going to get in front of on social media, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's such great advice. Well, wow, I can't believe we've covered so much ground today. I'm so excited to have you on and talk about all these great insights and ideas for our listeners. But is there anything I didn't ask you or something you wanted to share maybe that I didn't get to or something there?
Yeah, just to reiterate that point in that quote about for students, for job seekers, remember that Dale Carnegie quote is when you're dealing with people, remember you're not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures of emotion, bristling with prejudice and motivated by their own pride and envy. And remembering that we live in an increasingly stressful world where your employers and supervisors, they have their own stressors, motivations, and problems that they are looking to solve. So if you can clearly and effectively communicate how you can solve their problems and make their lives easier, you have a much higher chance of success. Um, and yeah, get out there, get involved, get visibility, volunteer, um, get involved with professional associations, and just network so that when you might need a job, you already have a good network that's actively working for you as well.
Amazing. Some wonderful takeaways. Great advice, Jonah. I thank you so much for on this snowy day out in Vancouver for you taking the time to spend with me and the audience and listeners. It's just been a great opportunity to hear from you and to learn some more about what people should be thinking about. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And I hope that, yeah, what I said has a lot of value to your audience.
I absolutely will. And for our listeners, if you liked what you heard today, please share this podcast with your network on Spotify. Give us a rating and also follow us at Coffee with Convery on Instagram. And for now, this has been Coffee with Convery, and stay well.